One of the core aspects of a circular economy is the reduction of waste and inefficiencies. And this can be applied to the electricity sector too. The more we add renewable to the energy mix, the bigger the challenge of consuming and producing electricity at the same time. These grid stability issues can be addressed with smart grids that can reduce inefficiencies in the energy system, encouraging smarter consumption patterns. Our next speaker is Simon Bushell, founder and CEO of Sympower. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you. Good evening. And I'd also like to say thank you to Enrico for this fantastic introduction. I think I can skip the first half of my presentation because indeed at the end, Enrico mentioned players who will conduct the orchestra, and that's exactly what Sympower does. So can you see the presentation?
Yes, we do.
Fantastic. So I'd like to, so I'm Simon Bushell, CEO and founder of Sympower, and I'd like to talk today about how demand response can contribute to the circular economy. So I'm going to do that by, going into how the electricity system works a little bit, although, as I said, Enrico has already touched on a lot of this, so I will keep that bit short. I'll talk about challenges in the future energy system and the waste therein, and demand response as a solution to that waste and to those challenges. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about Sympower. So as Enrico just talked about, so the demand and supply of electricity must always be in balance. And there's a number of organizations in every country that are responsible for this, keeping the supply and demand of electricity in balance. Those are called the transmission system operators, who in Italy is Terna, and the distribution system operators are responsible for this on a more local level. As you might have heard already, I'm myself British, and so to give an example of this, of how the electricity system works, I like to use an example from the UK. So in the UK, we like watching football, and we have this very odd habit of during half time, rather than getting a beer, for example, we go to the kitchen and we make a cup of tea. So at half time, what happens is that millions of people across the UK, for example, in a World Cup match, go to the kitchen and at the same time turn on their kettles. And this leads to a very large spike in electricity. I believe that at the last World Cup, you could actually see this spike, and it was about the equivalent of having to turning on two entire new coal-fired power plants. So it's a huge spike just for a very short space of time. And at the moment, that's exactly how we solve that problem. So there are coal and gas-fired power plants, the dispatchable loads that Enrico mentioned, which we're able to turn on and off when we want to. And so, for example, when we all in the UK go to the kitchen, turn on the kettle, then somewhere else there are some coal and gas-fired power plants that suddenly have to produce a lot more electricity. This is an incredibly inefficient, expensive and polluting way of doing things, because essentially you have to have these coal and gas-fired power plants constantly on standby, burning gas, burning coal, ready for those few moments, that 5 minutes when everyone is using their kettle. And so, yeah, you're essentially burning this coal, burning this gas, producing these carbon dioxide emissions and at the same time not actually producing any electricity. And this problem is only going to get worse in the coming years. Again, as very well explained by Enrico, the wind and sun that is going to be replacing these coal and gas-fired power plants have a variable load profile, and there's going to be an increasing mismatch between the supply of electricity from the renewable generation and the demand. And yeah, maybe just to touch on one other thing before I go into demand response. So what's also interesting about this transition that we're going through is that there's also a transition in terms of transport and mobility. So we're moving from burning fossil fuels to get around to also having electric vehicles, electric buses, and so on. And that's again going to make this challenge more difficult, because again the demand for electricity is going to become more variable. And the same is happening with heat, with cooling. Again, we're moving more and more towards electrification, more variable load. And so this problem is only going to get worse and worse. And as was mentioned before, there's this 30% of renewable generation, and above that, if we increase the number of the amount of renewable generation without a good solution, we have to start curtailing. So we have to start throwing away a lot of electricity, and that's where demand response comes in. Yeah, I really like this quote about, or this definition, sorry, of the circular economy. And I think that demand response is all about this part, about designing waste out of the system. And so demand response is all about balancing the supply and demand of electricity on the demand side. So when there's, rather than when there's a peak in consumption, for example, through that the turning on of the kettles, instead of solving that by burning more coal or burning more gas, we instead look to find somewhere else where we can actually turn down the electricity consumption, so that overall the electricity consumption stays flat, but it's being used in the places that need to use it now, and somewhere else they're waiting a minute to use electricity. And again, you know, the simplest explanation of this also is, when the sun shines, we use more electricity. When the sun stops shining, we use less. And so that's exactly what Sympower does. So on the one side, we look for these assets, these processes where we can actually make the consumption of electricity flexible. And then we connect those processes to our software platform. We bundle all that flexible power supply, and then we use that as a solution to this grid balancing problem. So we sell that flexibility to those grid operators that I mentioned earlier. So to give a concrete example, if you have a refrigerator in a supermarket, if you were to turn that off for a few minutes, for example, when the kettles are being turned on, if you turn the refrigerator off for a few minutes, then all of the products in the fridge is still going to stay cold, but the electricity consumption is going to go down, which then will allow the electricity consumption somewhere else to go up. And so we do that in thousands of different locations, and overall we can then have just as big an effect as a gas-fired power plant, for example, being turned on. Yeah, so as I just mentioned, so we connect the appliances to our cloud-based platform, and when there's a problem, we adjust the consumption. Sometimes that's turning it off, or sometimes that's actually turning it on to match, or turning it up, turning consumption up to match, for example, an increase in solar supply. And for the people who own the assets, so the supermarket where the refrigerators are, for example, they get paid for delivering this service, and they're able to reduce their carbon footprint. So to give you some examples of where we do this, so we, Sympower, work, for example, with greenhouses, in the paper industry, where a lot of electricity is used, in wastewater treatment, both in industries, but also in the wastewater treatment for a town or a city, and also in commercial buildings. And we're more and more looking at some of these more these growth domains that I sort of talked about earlier a bit as well. So in terms of solar, but also smart charging. Yeah, so making sure that the cars are charged at the right moment, district heating as well, and also in data centers and batteries and so on. So the impact we have with this is that directly we have less reliance on the fossil fuels for balancing. It means that the least efficient plants that we currently use just for those peak moments get used even less often, or even more can potentially even get switched off. And that means also that the plants that are still running, that we do still have to have until we go to an all renewable energy system, can actually be used much more efficiently. And indirectly, in the long run, that 30% barrier, that 30% of renewables can then easily be broken, and we can eventually go towards 100% renewable electricity system. So just to finish off, to say a little bit about Sympower. So Sympower is the market leader in these services in the Nordics. We have about 350 megawatts of controllable power, which is kind of equivalent to a medium-sized town. And we're providing these grid balancing services to 3 TSOs. We work in the Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, Estonia, and Israel. We're an independent player, so that means we work with lots of different energy companies, but we aren't an energy company ourselves. And we're a very mission-driven party. We are doing this in order to do something about climate change, in order to help speed up the energy transition. We also have here with a slightly vested interest in that we're looking for partners in Italy, because as was mentioned in the previous presentation, there are some big challenges in Italy, and we'd love to help solve them. So we're looking to get to know some energy companies, energy consultancies, and also commercial industrial companies who might have some flexibility to be able to supply to the grid, and we can help them to do that. So thank you for your time and for listening. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but if we do, then I'm very happy to receive them. And otherwise, look forward to connecting with you afterwards.
Thank you, Simon. Actually, I have a couple of questions for you. First one, every time I listen to about smart grids project, usually a blockchain is involved. You didn't mention blockchain, so I guess that's not your case, right?
No, definitely not. I have nothing in principle against blockchain, but I think it should be used when it's needed. And there are certainly really interesting applications within kind of demand response for blockchain. So, for example, when you're looking at registering the transactions in lots of different households. But the thing is, at the moment, I guess the number of transactions that we're dealing with and so on, that they're all regulated in a different way, and so we're able to just to measure those ourselves and to communicate that with the grid operator without the need for a blockchain. Okay, thanks. And what about the penetration of those smart grids? They already have widespread usage in some countries. I guess it depends exactly how you define smart grids. So yeah. I guess one element is about smart metering, which varies in penetration. Some countries are almost 100% already. In terms of what we do, so on the demand response and the grid flexibility side of things, so there's actually some European Commission regulations that actually have stipulated that all countries should be open for aggregation and for players like ourselves by the end of 2020. That's not going to happen. Some countries are quite a long way behind. But you can see that there's a few countries like the UK, like the Nordics, like the Netherlands and Belgium that are already quite far ahead, and there's already quite a lot of demand response already in their in the system.